I'm delighted to be able to a fellow Canadian, and that would be Andre Francois Giroux. And we're looking at LLB and civil law, as well as international business law from McGill University. And one of our very coveted Rotarians, Lena Suki Schmidt, is also an alumni of McGill. And Andre has also achieved honors at College of Europe, an MBA from the University of Montreal, as well as he joined the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade in 1995. Andre has served abroad at the permanent mission to the United Nations in New York, in part during Canada's term on the Security Council and as counselor at the Embassy to France. In Canada, he has had assignments in the International Trade Law Bureau, in the International Economic Relations and Summits Division, in the Office of Protocol. He was also director of Non-Proliferation, Disarmament, and Space Division, and director of the Office of the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. Most recently, Andre was the NAFTA Secretary and Director of the Trade Agreements Secretariat after having served as ambassador to Denmark. So right now, it's of great pleasure and honor to present Mr. Andre Francois Giroux, Consul General of Canada in Sydney. Over to you, Andre.
Thank you so much, Katie, for those warm words. Bonjour, everyone. I feel very honored to be here today, and I'm also pleased to speak to you from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I'd like to pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Also, a special thank to Mark for making this possible. I feel really honored and privileged to have been inviting to join you as one of your honorary members, especially during this very special year, which is marking your 100th anniversary of the club here in Sydney. I don't have to tell you how significant of an organization Rotary is and how well understood your contributions are around the world. When it comes to Sydney and Canada, our links to this place are long and storied. I am the proud successor of John Short Lark, who arrived in Sydney in 1895 as Canada's first ever trade commissioner anywhere in the world, making Sydney Canada's oldest trade posting. So 126 years of direct engagement there. And then the irony I find is that we came here to sell you wood. So not as if there's no wood in Australia, but I guess there must be something special with that Canadian wood. But Canada Bay in the city's inner west is named in honor of the 58 French Canadians who were deported here in 1840 after the Lower Canada Rebellion, and who broke stone for the construction of Parramatta Road. The interesting story about this is that of the 58 who came, when their time was up, 57 went back to Canada. So I don't know what that says about how welcoming Australia. I think they were all men in their adulthood who probably were very keen to get back to their loved ones. But one did stay married and stay behind, and then I believe has quite a few descended here in Australia still. So it will not come to you as a surprise to learn that Sydney is considered a prized posting for diplomats. And now having been here for a year, I can definitely see why. And to be honest, I knew very much what I was looking for when I applied for the position, and I feel very fortunate to have been the lucky winner. We all know how incredibly challenging the past 18 months have been globally, but I think we can all agree that we're lucky to be here despite the recent lockdown, but, now being in a transition and almost out of it, again, is a good testimony to Australia, incredible ability to turn the situation around, from going from a very low vaccination rate to, one of the world leaders, if not at the top of the list. Katty told you a little bit about myself, but I'd like to just say a few more words. I came directly from our nation capital city, Ottawa, before coming here a year ago. And I had postings, as was mentioned, in New York at the UN, in Paris at our bilateral embassy, and in Copenhagen as ambassador to the Kingdom of Denmark, and where I had the pleasure to meet your princess, Mary. I'm sure you all know that the future Queen of Denmark is a proud Australian who married the Crown Prince about 20 years ago now. But during every one of those assignments, I always cherish the many professional and personal relationships that I developed with my Australian counterparts. So your fellow mates educated me about a lot, and just to name a few, the rivalry between Sydney and Melbourne, which is not dissimilar to what we have between Toronto and Montreal. There's also among us federal civil servant a big competition about which capital city is the most sexy, whether it's Canberra or Ottawa. The jury is still out there, but when you have to move to a city like Ottawa or Canberra in your 20s because you just joined a great job, sometimes the reality is quite harsh. But that being said, Canada and Australia a lot of similarities, but at the same time some differences. But and the list is long, but it does include our Indigenous heritage, of course, and recognition of country, but also strong Commonwealth linkages. Our multicultural present is also something that makes us very similar. We also love contact sports, not the same, but contact sports nevertheless, and beer. So we also share experience of extreme temperature, although at the very opposite ends of the thermometer there. So not surprisingly, every day I am amazed by the depth of our relations and in every aspect of life. And whether it is government to government, business to business, or people to people. And every day I'm also amazed at all the ways we are connecting and by the opportunities that we have to do more. So just to give you an example, recently this past winter, 55 Aussie firefighters were deployed to Canada for several weeks to help us battle the devastating wildfires in BC and Ontario. But just last year, it was the other way around when Canadian fire experts came here to help with the horrific bushfires. So in times of need, we know that we can count on each other. And this is why I called my presentation today, Redefining Mateship, Canada-Australia cooperation in the new world. So as you know, mateship is an Australian cultural idiom that embodies equality, loyalty, and friendship. So if that doesn't describe Canada and Australia, I wonder what does. Because at the heart of mateship, there are shared values and principles that unite us today. And then for Canada and Australia, this is a shared belief in democracy, the rule of law, gender equality, diversity and Indigenous rights, and the principle of open and transparent market economies. In a nutshell, we love a rules-based international order and are working very hard to create and maintain it. And for Canada and Australia, this is not a nice to have. Although you live on an island, and sometimes we hear the analogy, you live on an island, you don't necessarily have to worry too much about what's happening outside. The reality is that we live very much in a globalized world. And for Canada and Australia, a rules-based international order is essential. It is the extension of our national fabric, a common platform for us to implement better policies for better lives. But neither of us can do it alone. Our success rests in our ability to join forces for our collective security, prosperity, and well-being. These shared values and principles guide us in responding to the emerging global issues that the new world we live in. So whether it's new digital landscape or pandemic responses and recovery, to the real and existential threats posed by climate change, rising autocracy and threat to democracy. This new world we are facing is complex and brings a complex set of interconnected challenges and issues. So effective international cooperation like we have between Canada and Australia and courageous values-based leadership are crucial to creating the needed global solution. And this is where, as mates, we can thrive. And while I mentioned we share many common interests and challenges, today I like to focus on what we call the 3 Cs. So the first C is COVID-19 recovery. The other C is the rise of China and the Indo-Pacific region. And the third C is climate change. Just to illustrate some of the great work that we do together. So in all of these Cs, our track record, Canada-Australia cooperation is very impressive. So when it comes to COVID-19 recovery, as said before, a very good reason to be grateful to be in Australia right now. Despite all the disruptions that the pandemic has brought, our respective governments continue to prioritize efforts to help us through it and are fully mobilized to ensure a smooth recovery. So we're very fortunate to live in economies where governments have the means and the resources to ease up the transition. The recovery offers, of course, many opportunities to reset policies and practices in favor of more sustainable growth that leaves no one behind. As we strive to build back better, opportunities to do more together exist. As trading nations, Canada and Australia rely on open and transparent market economy principles and a rule-based international system. These are essential to level the playing field for international trade and maintaining open and connected supply chains. These were tested during the first time during the pandemic, but especially during the first months of the pandemic. So as made nations, we are working together to resist protectionism and economic nationalism. As made nations, we believe in open, competitive markets that can ensure free and inclusive trade so that our companies can compete and flourish. As made nations, we are also putting in place inclusive trade policies to ensure that our traditionally underrepresented groups, such as women entrepreneurs and indigenous peoples, are able to share in the benefit of international trade and investment. Because if you don't make international trade more inclusive, you are bound to see popular movement against it. So our strategy, both Australia and Canada, is to make sure that everybody appreciates the benefit of it and share in the benefits. We do this through our shared membership in the CPTPP. That's a long mouthful, but it's a comprehensive and progressive trans-Pacific partnership. So this is the free trade agreement. It's a regional free trade agreement that we are both part of. So we have free trade between Australia and Canada since the CPTPP came into force a few years ago. Also, our shared membership in the G20, the APEC, the WTO, the World Trade Organization, to name a few. Unfortunately, in the new world we live in, nothing can be taken for granted. As I said, some of those key principles of rule-based international order and predictability were put to a test. So which makes me moving to my second C, China and the Indo-Pacific. So, you would know more than probably anybody else that China's actions can have a very profound impact on your economy. China is Australia's largest two-way trading partner in goods and services and fifth largest foreign direct investor. So when China uses coercive diplomacy practices to express displeasure, it is felt hard and deep. So recent actions, such as putting through threats of trade sanctions, investigations, unexpected custom delays, did affect your exports of wine, beef, and barley, to name a few. So again, a true rules-based trading system is Canada's and Australia's best guard against such practices. And for this, we need a reform, a well-functioning World Trade Organization. And Canada and Australia have been working closely together to lead this effort. Our cooperation within the Ottawa Group on WTO reform has been key to its success and highly celebrated. But unfortunately, coercive practices are not limited to the economic spheres. The alarming practices of arbitrary detention has also characterized our respective relations with China. For us, it was the two Michaels, two men working in China who were arbitrarily detained for more than 1,000 days for the only reason of being Canadian. Again, a way of expressing, it was a way for China to express its displeasure with action taken by Canada. For you, you would have heard of writer Dr. Yang Engjong and CGNT anchor Mrs. Cheng Li. In responses to these actions, Canada launched earlier this year the Declaration Against Arbitrary Detention in State-to-State Relations. We did this to demonstrate global opposition to the practice of arbitrary arrest, detention, and sentencing of foreign nationals for diplomatic leverage. Basically, we want to send a strong message that if you have problems or issues with some of our policies, don't take it on our citizens. The declaration is now endorsed by more than 1/3 of the world's countries. Australia is among the partners most supportive to move quickly and decisively on this issue. And your Minister of Foreign Affairs, Senator the Honorable Mary Spain, has referenced the declaration publicly on numerous occasions. So we're very, very grateful for that support. You also joined in our advocacy efforts, helping to secure endorsements for many countries around the world and in the Pacific region. So thank you. These two examples show the importance of joint concerted efforts to guard against coercive practices and reassert our shared values and principles. It is with that in mind that we welcome last month the announcement of the new trilateral security partnership known as AUKUS. AUKUS will deepen security collaboration between Australia, the UK, and the US in the Indo-Pacific, with at its center Australia's acquisition of nuclear power submarines. Canada, like Australia, understands the importance of turning words into action and building strategic partnership based on shared values. The extremely close cooperation that has characterized the Five Eyes partner. The Five Eyes partners are a close, tight community made of Canada, Australia, US, UK, and New Zealand. These past decade, our partnership as Five Eyes and the trust that we developed through it paved the way for this important development. Canada is very supportive of Australia's leadership in the region, and then we are looking forward to our continuous engagement with you, the other Five Eyes partners and regional allies, for a peaceful, stable, and safe Indo-Pacific. Because at the end of the day, that's all that matters: peaceful, stable, safe. That brings me to my last C, climate change and net zero. You may have read recently that COP26 is around the corner, and now is the time to act. Canadians and Australians know that and how critical action on climate is, and expect nothing less from public and private sector leaders. For Canadians and Australians, when it comes to net zero, the challenges are real. So often, you hear of the success of other countries, but when you look at their economic fabric, you realize that they're living on a different planet, right? But when it comes to the challenges of going to net zero, Canada and Australia, we speak the same language. Vast lands, extreme weather, dispersed populations, energy-intense industries. But I would argue that so are the opportunities. Abundance of renewable energy sources and primary resources, resilient workers, innovation leaders. So many of you would have visited or worked in each country and know the similarities between Canada and Australia firsthand, be they geographic, cultural, or industrial. The reason to learn from each other, cooperate, share technologies, and put our best minds together to turn these challenges into real opportunities are as numerous. The hard reality is that we both need to take more actions in the short term, domestically and internationally. And the sooner we do it, the bigger the economic benefits. And just recently, the Business Council of Australia, the BCA, pleaded for an acceleration of emission reduction and seizing the first mover advantage for a stronger economy, stronger regions, and more jobs. Your states, like our provinces, are putting in place programs and policies to drive green investments. And it works. Just last week, entrepreneur Dr. Forrest is investing to turn around, decarbonize its energy intensive mining operations. So Dr. Forrest is at the head of a Fortescue, which is one leading mining company, and he's committed to make his mining operations carbon neutral. And he's also determined to make Australia a green hydrogen superpower. So those policies and that leadership is happening. Canadian and Australian entrepreneurs are leading some of the much needed technological innovations that will make this possible. So let's just roll up our sleeves and join forces together. And the list goes on, but nobody would understand better than Rotarians the importance of value-based relationships that defines us. We all heard about the impact of my two fellow Canadians had in helping to introduce Rotary to Australia and New Zealand back in 1921. 100 years later, that legacy is young and vibrant. And for example, I know your Rotary Friendship Exchange and Youth Exchange are two important programs between Canada and Australia that creates the foundation of those critical collaborations. These programs allow Rotarians and non-Rotarians to experience a different culture, broaden their international understanding, and build lasting relationships. Mateships embodies equality, loyalty, and friendship. No doubt Canada and Australia are equals by their size, political, economic, and societal structures. Same goes to loyalty and friendship. You know, our Consulate General here, marking 126 years of Canadian presence in Australia, is standing straight and tall. Add to this a strong sense of purpose based on shared values and principles, and you have what I would call the New World's definition of mateship. So, you know, as a final word, I would say, please do not hesitate to reach out because we want to connect even more. So, merci. Thank you. And I'm open to many questions.
Excellent, Andre. Thank you very much for that. Very interesting. And the good news is that we do have quite a few questions, and I'm sure that some more questions will arise as we move through them. I would like to go to Glenn Stafford firstly, because Glenn, I really am interested in your question, and I was just wondering about comparisons between Australia and Canada in terms of things like ICAC and that sort of stuff. But can you ask your question, Glenn?
Certainly. Andre, great to see you again. It's been a while since our centenary celebrations. I went to Toronto several times when I was working with TCS, a large Indian company, and they are part of the Global Leadership Circle on the Canadian Indian Business Council. And my first time to Toronto, I was asked to give the vote of thanks to the then Premier of Ontario, which I think I've got the right state, who at a business council dinner. And what I commented on in that vote of thanks was the comfort I got from the fact that there were shared values and principles, but also shared challenges, whether that's around climate, bushfires, terrorism, etc. It really felt I was at home. But my question is the differences between Australia and Canada. And if you could pick one example of that Australia can learn from and that we could follow to improve our society, what would that be?
Oh.
You can be critical.
I don't need to be critical, but I mean, again, you know, it's every day I walk the streets here, and although it's warm and I see palm trees, you know, it's almost forget that I'm not in Canada. So there's really that sense of familiarity that is there, and it's strong. But there are differences. there are differences. I've been amazed by your, I mean, the fact that you needed to ask to leave the country during the pandemic is something that I don't think we would have been able to enforce on Canadians. So there is we often think of Australia as very direct. That would be, I would say, very direct and pretty blunt in some of their interactions, but at the same time, a strong respect for the rule of law. I think stronger than we have in Canada, and definitely stronger than we have in Quebec. And then we always like to look at ourselves as like the French of Canada, and then a little rebel there. But here I'm impressed by how so I would say those are very good qualities, because as a society, you can see that there's a strong respect for order and but at the same time it's a bit of a paradox, very outspoken and very direct. When I watch political debates and I see how direct are your premiers are, this is something where I'm thinking maybe there, it would make it easier to run the country if people were a little bit more diplomatic with each other. We don't have that in Canada. A lot of every premier loves to criticize the federal government, but among each other they tend to rally together and then present a united front to the federal government, and then I think they can have that higher impact. And here it seems like everybody's pulling in their direction. But that would be my little call. But I would say it's hard to find those differences. You have to work hard.
It's interesting because last week I saw a ruling from our Supreme Court about the legality of vaccinations and lockdowns and these sorts of things. And in that ruling, there was a reference to a Bill of Rights that we don't have in Australia that Canada does have, and of course they have in the UK. So I'm wondering whether, and I expect that that's why Canada probably couldn't enforce some of the things that we have because of the Bill of Rights. So it sort of complicates that discussion, I think, a little bit. Thanks for your question, Glenn, and for your answer, Andre. We have another questioner, and it's past President Diana Richards, coming to us today from the Gold Coast, I imagine. Hi, Diana.
Hi, yes, I am on the Gold Coast. Andre, thank you very much for your talk, and pleased to hear about all the similarities between Australia and Canada. But you didn't mention one, and that is about your use of nuclear energy. And I know that British Columbia has a very large anti-nuclear movement, but I'm wondering what advice your Canadian nuclear power specialists might have for Australia with regard to our energy needs in the future.
Well, this is a very interesting question, because as you may also know that the three top exporter of uranium in the world is Australia, Canada, and Kazakhstan, I believe. Kazakhstan #1, but then comes Canada and Australia. So we are uranium-rich country, and I have to say I was surprised when I found out coming here that you had a moratorium on nuclear energy, right? Civil nuclear energy. We're not talking about nukes and bombs and things like that, because of course Canada also has a very strong position on this. But when it comes to so sitting on all that uranium, you have to wonder why are we not putting it to good use to help ourselves? Because in Canada, when we look at the challenges we're facing with climate change, I think we all have to appreciate we already have a substantial part of our electricity produced by nuclear energy. And then the feeling is definitely that maintaining that contribution is key, and then increasing that contribution is also part of the solution. So whether that could be an option for Australia, that's for Australians to decide. As Katie said, I was director of non-proliferation and disarmament, and part of our role was to enforce non-proliferation and nuclear around the world. And in Canada, as a nuclear country, we feel very strongly that we have to lead by example. So in order to be able to go to Iran and enforce some of those disciplines, because I'm sure if you follow the international politics, Iran is arguing that it needs to develop its own nuclear civil energy program. But at the same time, we say that's all fine, but we need verification, because the idea is it's such sensitive technology that you need international verification to make sure and give everybody the peace of mind that this technology is not going to be used for other purposes. So it's very intrusive. It's very heavy on the administrative side, and Canada is welcoming those inspectors on a regular basis. So I would say, nuclear energy is from a carbon neutrality perspective is carbon neutral. Nuclear waste remain a bit of an issue to resolve. You have to have a place where you can store that nuclear waste, but there are many possibilities today. But the key is really strong commitment to those non-proliferation principles, and that was the bargain that was struck 50 or so years ago when we had the non-proliferation treaty accepted. So nuclear, the P5, those who had the nuclear technology, agreed to share it for civil purposes because they all recognized that it was something that could bring some good, but with a very strong regime of verification. So, I've read a lot of the news reports about AUKUS, and then of course we're talking about nuclear propulsed submarine, and then I also saw information that didn't mean that there was any interest from the government to reopen that moratorium that you have on civil nuclear energy, which is, I guess is something that I would respect very much. But again, Canada as a country, we have seen the benefit of it, but we would argue that it's an industry that needs to be, you have to embrace those principles of verification, and they're very important.
Yes, thanks for that, Andre, and for your question, Diana. I grew up in the Latrobe Valley in Victoria, which is, where most of the coal, the electricity comes from for Victoria, and it does irk me a little bit when I see flyover footage of the plumes of steam coming out of the cooling towers. I know that coal, obviously does produce toxic fumes, but not the ones that come out of the cooling towers that always make it onto the TV. It's the non-visible emissions that are the dangerous ones. But thank you for that. It's an interesting conversation about nuclear energy and nuclear electricity. Over to you, Jeff Wilbo. Jeff, you have a question. I'm not sure what your question is about, but over to you.
Hi, Andre, and thank you for your presentation. It shows us once again those very deep links between Australia and Canada in so many ways. Another area where Australia and Canada have been hand in glove throughout history has been our military forces, whether we look at the Western Front or Capion or even Afghanistan. I think we've always been allies and never enemies. Bit of a connection with the Rotary Club of Sydney. One of our former, now deceased members did 27 crossings of the Atlantic as an anti-submarine officer in the early 1940s. So as part of the Canadian Navy, on secondment. So a lot of military connections there. It surprised me when the recent alliance between Britain, the US and Australia was announced, that Canada wasn't included in that. I'm not sure whether Canada wasn't invited or Canada declined, which way it went. Canada, of course, has had a very long connection with NATO. So the other two powers in there are very clearly connected with Canada militarily. It just seemed, as a Pacific power, and indeed, as you say, part of the Five Eyes, I don't know, I hope I'm not asking a question that is pushing the bounds, but I was just really surprised. I'm just wondering if you could have any thoughts on why we haven't brought Canada into those other three, dare I say it, English-speaking Pacific powers?
Yeah. So it's a good question, which a lot of Canadians have been asking as well. The reality is that the bulk of the AUKUS partnership is about nuclear propulsed submarines. And this is not something Canada is looking into acquiring. So the purpose of the whole deal is to transfer that submarine technology, something we are not looking. I mean, Canada, due to our geographic situation, we are investing in upgrading our naval capacity in the Arctic, but not necessarily the submarine one. And then I've been being so close to the US, some of that work is been taken care of by others, first to speak. You're at the other end of the world all by yourself. It's a different, obviously different proposition. So you're right. A lot of people have been wondering. The answer is exactly what I gave you. But that said, we are not giving up our privileged relationship with Australia, the UK, and the US for other purposes. So submarines is one thing, but when it comes to engaging strategically and the security of the Indo-Pacific, we are a Pacific nation, and then we very much want to carry on and continue that close partnership. So we are still around, not in AUKUS per se, but we're very much for the rest.
Thanks. Excellent question, Jeff, and thank you for your answer, Andre. Now, I'm looking at 8 minutes. So I'd really like to hear your question, Adrian. Adrian is our Director of Communications and Innovation. And I'd really like to hear your question, Adrian. Over to you.
Hi, Andre. Nice to see you again. And thank you so much for gracing us with all your infinite wisdom. It's been nice to hear more about the Australian-Canadian relationship. I think we can all agree that we've always understood the relationship to be very friendly, but it's nice to understand the nuances a little bit more. I have a little bit of a different question. You talked a lot about how Australia and Canada are very similar. And so I thought I'd take a little bit of a different approach and ask you about one area that Australia doesn't do very well, according to international progressive leaders, and Canada does do really well. And that's on the point of immigration policy. So I wanted to ask the really pointed question of what you think Australia could learn from Canada.
Well, again, here we do have similar, because in Canada we have economic immigration, just like you have here. And then the bulk of the new immigrants that comes to Canada, we select very carefully, like you do. So there are some similarities there. Maybe we haven't had the same, we haven't had, it's not a maybe, we haven't had the same people coming by boats where we don't control. So it's a very different proposition again here, because I know some of the policies you've put in place were put in place specifically to stop, discourage, send a strong message to people who try to come by boat, don't do this, because it's not going to give you a fast entry into Australia. There's a process, and follow it. So for that very reason, I think we've been probably a little bit more because again, even for refugees, we do select. We do have the privilege of selecting some of our refugees. We do get the people who are boarding planes and show up and claim refugee status. So, but very similarly to Australia, we believe in our responsibility internationally, but we also want to have a say in who gets to become Canadians and not just accept everybody. So it is, we both rely on a dynamic immigration system. I know there's been some talk recently, last week, I think, New South Wales was musing to the fact that maybe we need to open the gates again, or the pipeline, so because the projections, the economy rely on it. For Canada, and then when I walk around here in Australia, I would say it's been a very, very positive journey for both of our countries, because the being able to select the future Canadians and Australians increases tremendously the success of those new Canadian and Australian to integrate and be productive members of society. So this is, again, I wish I could say, I think we have been doing fairly well when you look at the rest of the world, both Australia and Canada. And then I know education is one entry where we're competing. We're not always, in some cases, good partners compete. So we are competing to attract the best and the brightest through our education system. And in Canada, I believe it's similar in Australia. We use this as a entry into citizenship, right? So if you have a degree from a Canadian university and you behaved well while you were in Canada, you usually get fast-tracked through immigration, because again, you had the privilege of training individuals. They have the tools and the skills to become productive members of society. So voila. Strong believers in a dynamic immigration policy. I think we are fortunate. We both have great countries. There's room for more, but again, saying we want more doesn't necessarily mean we're going to welcome everybody. And then we feel very strongly about that too in Canada. You have to be good citizens and have good records. It's just the reality.
Yeah, thanks,
Thank you.
Andre. And thank you for your question, Adrienne. So look, we have a few minutes left for a quick vote of thanks. Hugh, not putting a time limit on you. I know you're excited to give our vote of thanks to Andre. Hugh, I'll hand over to you for that.
Thank you very much, Mark. Andre, thank you so much for your presentation today. It's wonderful that we can discuss this friendship between Australia and Canada. The similarities between our two nations is quite amazing, whether it be from our First Nations peoples to our federal system to being an integral part of the Commonwealth, are all key. And this has gone throughout the histories of both of our nations and on the world stage. Time and again, Canada and Australia stood together. We've talked already, and the questions are asked about the defence, the First and Second World Wars in Korea and other places, and that was vitally important. And I think it's quite amazing that there was a trade representative here back in 1895. I think that's hilarious. I mean, buying timber off the Canadians is like us selling snow to you guys. I think that's pretty good. So, but it's just quite amazing that we've got that shared history. And the way I really saw it more recently was during the bushfires with the RFS and seeing the Canadians in the exchanges. And more recently, 2 colleagues from my brigade were sent to Canada with the bushfires and to dealing with bushfires there. And that's a regular thing we do every year. And it just shows that mateship is a real mateship. We've worked together as 2 nations whenever we've both been in trouble, whether it being during the wars or it's been during economic depressions or being more recently with the bushfires. And that very much, I think, reflects what Rotary is all about. We talk about our friendships in Rotary and doing good for our community. And I think our 2 nations very much reflect that. So thank you for today. Thank you very much for what you've had to say and the questions you've answered. I particularly like the immigration questions. As a Labor MP, I'm happy to push that. But it was very, very good, and so thank you. And I look forward very much to seeing you in real life once again, rather than on the Zoom as the months progress.
Yeah. Likewise.